I have received a tremendous amount of messages about this, and I understand. I've tried to avoid talking about it, but I thought about not talking about it because it hasn't gone through yet, and I want to preface everything with the fact that this hasn't been completely approved. It's not a guarantee that this is even happening. But it does appear that this is something both Union Pacific and Norfolk Southern want to do. And for those out of the loop, Union Pacific wants to acquire Norfolk Southern in an effective merger for around $85 billion. That's a combination of cash and stock. It's not a completely cash transaction. But that would be major, because Norfolk Southern isn't a small railway, and neither is Union Pacific. I'm sure most of you know that. If this went through, that would be, well, the first actual transcontinental railroad. Not just a few companies sharing it. No, like, they would have a coast-to-coast railroad in America. Yo! Okay. So, let's go over the finer points of this, because I've heard a lot of people throwing things around, and given I've talked about railroad business many times before, made a whole video about Norfolk, their history into becoming Norfolk Southern, some people want to know what I think, and I think, wow, that's gonna be a lot. But I don't see it as necessarily a bad thing, but I do see it as something that's going to shake things up quite a bit, in a variety of ways, definitely. For one thing, there is the concern, well, people are throwing around the word monopoly, that they would have a monopoly, and no, they wouldn't. Their competitors would still exist. I mean, obviously, Norfolk Southern wouldn't, they'd be one thing, but CSX and BNSF still exist, along with Canadian Pacific Kansas City Limited Railways, CPKC, who just became a thing after their own pretty massive merger. Now, what this would likely cause, I imagine, would be CSX and BNSF being like, hey, wow, what a huge, massive problem for both of us. We might want to start talking about some things. And it is possible, maybe, hard to say, that they too would merge, and we'd have multiple gargantuan railways in America. That is a possibility, though obviously it hasn't been confirmed, but if it were me, I would be thinking that, if I was in the place of either BNSF or CSX right about now. Additionally, some people are throwing around the Penn Central thing. Oh, it's going to be so big, hard to manage, there's going to be duplicate routes. Not really, no. This is, despite the size, not like Penn Central. When Penn Central became a thing, the major problem, well, one of many major problems, was that both New York Central and the Pennsylvania Railroad occupied much of the same territory, so there were a ton of redundancies. Norfolk Southern and Union Pacific aren't really like this. They don't really have a lot of redundancies, as Norfolk Southern has most of their space in the east, whereas Union Pacific is mostly in the west. So it would, in effect, be an end-to-end merger. So that I don't see as a major problem, and let's be fair about this, Union Pacific is no stranger to just eating everyone around them. BNSF is the only one that has survived this practice. Do you have any idea how many railroads Union Pacific has absorbed over the years? Because it's a lot. And they're good at it. They're good at remaining stable during it. I imagine they've thought this through. And Norfolk Southern's perspective is probably that they've been on a downslope ever since the bad press from the East Palestine accident in Ohio. They've been limping along ever since then, and they've been recovering, but maybe Union Pacific saw it as an opportunity to expand their own enterprises. Plus, back to the monopoly thing, railroads can't have a monopoly on long-distance travel anymore. It's impossible, because trucks still exist. That's been a thing since the 50s. That was the issue with the ICC. Because the ICC existed to make sure railroads couldn't abuse their monopoly on long-distance transit, but when they no longer had it, the rules hurt them too much, and they couldn't compete. In the modern day, there are other options beyond rail transit. Even though rail transit is arguably the most efficient option for many cases, it's still not the only one. So they wouldn't have a monopoly. They literally can't, unless they bought all the trucking companies too. And in a way, it could be a good thing for preservationists, because Union Pacific is top dog when it comes to preservation. I mean, they run their own steam engines. 4014 could run coast to coast if this went through, unimpeded, which would be pretty freaking awesome. I mean, that would be really cool, as could 844. I mean, there is some benefit here for everybody involved. But what about the downsides? Well, the downside is they'll just have more control over the lines, so what Union Pacific says goes. And I keep saying Union Pacific as if they'll be in charge, and yeah, I feel like they'll be pretty much in charge. I'm sure many of the execs over on the Norfolk Southern side will get some cushy seats on the board and a decent amount of stock, but effectively, Union Pacific will be assuming direct control, and they'll be the ones making all the decisions. Union Pacific is a very well-run railway, so I don't see that as necessarily a bad thing, but it is something to consider. Some people have also raised concerns about Norfolk Southern's own heritage equipment. I don't see that as being a problem because, again, Union Pacific's very good about respecting heritage, both for themselves as well as the fallen flags they've absorbed. They have a whole fleet of diesels painted in fallen flag colors for this particular reason. They're pretty good at public relations and preserving history as best they can, so, again, not really much of an issue there. I think a lot of this is just scare tactics because, oh my god, they'll be so big. Oh god, what's gonna happen? Just because they're big doesn't mean it'll be a bad thing. Maybe. But a lot can go wrong, because what are the downsides here? Well, the downside is that people will have less options. But in this case, they really didn't have Union Pacific as an option, or Norfolk Southern, depending on where they were, depending on what's being transited. In a way, it could be easier because you only have the one option. Well, that's not true, you have the competitors. So what I mean is, if you were on the East Coast, you had Norfolk Southern or CSX. If you were on the West Coast, you had Union Pacific or BNSF, and that was those were your options. And now it's taking one option out of the equation, and Union Pacific is just on both sides, along with CSX and BNSF, for your long-distance transit needs. I don't see it as becoming a major issue, though the unions are pushing back a little bit, because, well, when it comes to these mergers, usually there is a reduction in staff, because, well, the staff are considered redundant sometimes, and that could mean people are out of jobs. Yeah, that's probably going to happen. Not gonna pretend like it won't. Nobody likes that. I don't think anybody really likes that happening, but it is likely going to occur, and will likely have to occur in order to cut costs. But from an overall perspective, personally, I don't necessarily mind them doing this, as long as it's done appropriately, because if it's not done appropriately, it gives me a lot more content to talk about, because I get to talk about how much they screwed it up. But, you know, that's neither here nor there. I'm not really expecting that. I'd be surprised. But again, as I started this, and will end it, this hasn't been approved yet. It has to go through the Surface Transportation Board, the STB, which will review all the factors I've just gone over, impacts on competition, the overall industry, and decide whether or not to allow this to happen at all. If they say no, then it won't happen, because no, they said no. But if they say yes, then it will, and some people have pointed out with the current government administration, it will likely be allowed to go through, and that's probably correct. I personally expect this to happen, at this point. I don't think it's a guarantee, I could be wrong, but I wouldn't be surprised because, based off of the current situation, I don't think the merger would necessarily cause, well, complete havoc and chaos and destroy the economy. I don't think that's going to be a concern at all. People are worried about increased rates, but it might decrease rates because you could send stuff across the country with just one railroad as opposed to having to exchange. So it might make things better in some ways if Union Pacific decides to do that way. It is in their best interest to be competitive with their prices, because you have to consider trucks again. If they can't make it more affordable to go with them over trucks, then why would anyone go with them, you know? There's a lot of factors at play here, more than I can cover in a single video, and more than I can cover before it even happens, because there's likely a lot of unknowns. There are things that could happen that I wouldn't be expecting. A lot happened with Penn Central that nobody could have predicted, so, you know. we'll see what happens and see how it goes. But I don't expect the worst case scenario. I don't really expect the best case scenario. I expect a fine scenario that will probably involve CSX and BNSF merging in some capacity. I fully expect to happen if these two merge. Because they would almost have to. You know? Like that's what I fully expect. Calling it now. And if I'm wrong, well, I'm wrong. And if I'm not wrong, I get some bragging rights. Hooray! But there's also the issue of, what about the name? What are they going to call themselves? Well, historically speaking, every time Union Pacific takes over another railroad, they still call themselves Union Pacific. So I don't think there's going to be a name change at all. I think Norfolk Southern will simply cease to be a brand they utilize beyond their heritage equipment. However, let's say they did combine their names, as some railroads tend to do. I mean, Norfolk Southern on its own is a combination of Norfolk and Western and the Southern Railway. So what if they did that? Well, you could call them Union Southern, which sounds stupid, so let's not do that. You could call them Norfolk Pacific, which sounds better, but I think it'd be really funny. And they won't do this. But I think it'd be really funny if they called themselves Southern Pacific. Come on. Come on. That'd be great. I hope they do that. They won't, but I hope they do that. Alright? Just because it'd be hilarious. Till next time, this is Darkness, and I bid you all a fond farewell.